an incredible, incredible privilege to be here with all of you. Probably the smartest audience I've ever spoken to. It's humbling. I'm going to talk about exponential education. I'm going to talk about the field of human consciousness and the future of Africa. I'd love to start, firstly, just with getting everybody's views in the room. Human potential. We've heard so much about technology, how exponential it is, but is human potential infinite or exponential? So I just want to start with a show of hands. Who in the audience feels that a human being is exponential? Who feels that? Awesome. A lot. Who feels, now think about this really sincerely and deeply, who feels that every human being or most human beings could be exponential, not just a few? Awesome. Fantastic. Great to see that. The Bard says the same thing. Yes. Shakespeare in Hamlet, he said this about people. He said, what a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason. How infinite in faculties. In form and in moving, how expressed and how admirable. In apprehension, how like an angel. In action, how like a god. This is what human beings were meant to be, leveraging their full potential. But if that is so, then the question is, why aren't they? So you see on the screen here, faces of millions upon millions of Africans. These are South Africans. The problem seems to be getting worse. Just reading this morning in the news, over 7 million people in hunger in this country. We have the third highest youth unemployment in the world. And this is the face of it. We see the faces of these youth. This is what's going on in our country. This is serious, serious shit. Xenophobic killings, farm killings, schools being burnt down. Over 7,000 protests in our country in the last year. That's over 20 protests per day going on in different parts of the country. Friends, every single person on this screen here has actually been to school. There's probably no person on that slide who has not been into our school system. So if school is working, we wouldn't be here, so it can't be working. Can we reimagine a new type of education, a 21st century education system that works for all people, not just for some? And these stakes are very high. And this was a problem that in 1995, I gave up my job as an actuary. I was earning 1.3 million rand. I was 27 years old. It was just 1 year into the new South Africa. And I decided to go and try and learn about this problem. And I went into the townships for the first time, spent 4.5 years in Alexandria and Township. And I met up with a small group of crazy social entrepreneurs. And we decided, could we try an experiment to see if it's possible to change this? And we created a revolutionary new university that is now called the Maharishi Institute, to see if it is possible to change reality for these millions and millions of people. So let me tell you a story about just one individual. This is an individual called Nepo. He's just like so many others in South Africa. He's from a family of 13 children. In fact, he was brought up by his grandmother. 3 of his grandmother's daughters had passed away. And so 13 kids that were the children of these daughters came together, and they all lived with the grandmother on a 1,300 rand monthly pension. Nepo manages to get through school, comes out of the school system. Of course, there's no jobs, no opportunities. He can't get educated. And the guy's stuck. So what does he do? He does nothing for a year or two. Then he gets to start working in people's gardens as a gardener, just cleaning drains, gutters, whatever he can do. Gets a job as a taxi driver's assistant. Earns 20 rand a day. So in a month, under 500 rand a month. Every day on the taxi rank, all the guys who are working as taxi assistants and so on would spend 5 rand each that they'd give out of their 20 rand to buy bread and these cheap drugs you can buy in the township and just get high. The guy was literally, his life was pretty screwed. So he's our kind of student. He sounds perfect for our university when we find people like this. One day, Nepo was up on somebody's gutter cleaning their drains, and his old school principal from a few years ago, comes running down the road and he says, Nepo, unbelievable news. You've been awarded a bursary to go to university. And he nearly falls off the ladder. He's so shocked. His principal gave him the money. He arrived in Johannesburg, desperate and hungry. And he came into our university, and this is really what he experienced. So at our institution, we try to turn education on its head. Whereas traditionally, education is what we would call, we really focus on education from the inside out. And you'll see the face of some students there meditating. You'll see on the left of the slide there some of the things the students do in a day from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. And you'll see on the right here our philosophy about education. Education, amazingly enough, is all about human beings. That is all it's really about. It's about hearts and minds of human beings. And if we can get those hearts and minds excited, passionate, inspired, awake, develop self-confidence, self-esteem, help these young people deal with anger and depression and fear and PTSD and ADD and all these issues that young people are dealing with, then we can start to make a real difference. So while other students in other universities are studying statistics and finance, these students are learning about greatness and transcendental meditation, learning how to develop their own potential. And let's see the effect it has. So remember Nepo, this young guy, stuck in an incredibly difficult life on substances, no real work, no opportunities, very low levels of literacy. I'm going to show you Nepo 12 years later. Here he is. Beautiful man. Thank you. I feel the same way. Came through our university. We got him a job first, quite a junior position in a bank. Then he got quite a good job in a consulting firm, became a manager there. He now works in one of South Africa's biggest investment banks. Nepo earns 1 million rand today, 200 times what he was earning 12 years ago. He's a leader in his community. He's completely changed the lives of his families. He's vice president in this investment bank. So there's one student story, and it shows it actually can be done. Now the question is, can we do this for more than one person? And can we build a school for students like this? What if the answer is yes? So if you look on the screen here, you'll see Nepo's name here is number 3, Nepo Chaliza. He's vice president of sales at this merchant bank. And you'll just see here he's one of 11 students of ours who now working in this investment bank and across the bank as a whole, who either head entire national divisions of this bank or are vice presidents or assistant vice presidents. All of these, I call them kids, they were my kids, all earning between 850,000 and 2.4 million rand a year. Thank you. And we see the same thing now with graduates of ours right across this economy. This is one bank. We see the same thing across all the banks, the telcos, the IT companies. These students that we took out of dire poverty, who were really, truly stuck, you could call them societal rejects, are now heading divisions of many companies. Many of them are millionaires. And so maybe this tells us something is possible. I'll just give a few more examples. Cisco have a global IT competition. A few years ago, one of our students, who had never touched a computer before he came to university, he was the first African ever to win this global competition. And he beat every country in the world in which people compete in this competition. Accenture, we know it's incredibly hard to get into Accenture. We approached Accenture about 4 years ago to see if they'd take any of our graduates. They said they'd like to, but they can't. They take the top 10 students in the country from the number 1 university and the top 10 from the number 2 university, and they can't take any of ours. To cut a very long story short, which even included them getting a law firm to do due diligence on us and so on and so to see if this was possible, Accenture's now employed 180 of our graduates and students. And 4 years ago, they said they couldn't even take a single one. Thank you. So now, just to show and share, we've now done this over 17,000 times. We've taken over 17,000 Nepos out of the streets, people from just very, very, very difficult backgrounds, often virtually illiterate, and today they earn over R1 billion in combined salaries. We estimate that they'll earn over 28 billion, close to 30 billion in their working careers, and they're supporting 150,000 family members between them. So this shows it's possible, and this is why I get up every day and why I'm so excited, really, and why I love what I do so much every day. So this is Africa today, and these are the stakes that we're facing. We've got now 420 million youth across our continent. That is a huge number between ages 15 to 35. And what I'm very excited to say is 7 years ago when I was on my honeymoon, and got married at the tender age of 43. And we were in Mauritius, and I was trying to relax for the first time in I don't know how long. And I kept getting this call from somebody at the Department of Education. I thought, oh, God, what have we done wrong? Trying to get hold of me even on my honeymoon. And it turned out it was the former Deputy President, Kgalema Motlanthe. And around this work we've been doing with youth, could we develop a national strategy for unemployed youth? And one of the things that it's led to, which is very exciting, is I'm very fortunate to now be chairing a national initiative in South Africa to transform the school system, to start to put some of these ideas into the South African school system. So something that's going to reach, within 3 years, we should be getting up to reaching 13.9 million kids every single year. So what if we could do what I've just showed you with kids like Nepo? What if we could do it for every child in Africa? And what if we must do it if we want to have the future that we want? First thing that I want to say is we will have total abundance. We'll crack unemployment. We're going to crack poverty. We would have prosperity and great lives for everybody. And that's the dream. And so when people look at Africa, a lot of what they think is they just see at the bottom there, only 1/6 youth. This is according to the African Development Bank. Only 1 in 6 is in formal wage employment. 70% of these youth living on less than $2 per day. What if we could really, really change that and create an education system that works for all? And it's honestly possible. So before I talk about that, I just want to say, why is it so hard? And I'm going to go through this quite quickly, because billions are spent in this country on education, both by government, by corporates, so many well-meaning people. Why are we still struggling to get so many of our youth into a better life? So the first thing, and I'm going to jump through these, is firstly because the school system is so broken. Virtually half of all kids who come into grade 1 in South Africa, and virtually everyone goes into grade 1. Over 95% of South Africans will go into grade 1 and then proceed into grade 2, etc. But half of them drop out before they finish the school system because many, many reasons. Why is education so ineffective? And I think when we think about how our school system is built, it really is a 19th century system in a 21st century context. So it's like wearing an old shoe that just doesn't fit anymore. And it's not just old, it probably was poorly designed in the first place, very, very content-centric. Every year we test students coming out of South Africa's school system. Now these are kids who finished matric. This was 247 students that we actually took into university, like Nepo. So you can see here on a scale between grade 1 to grade 12, on a standardized test that you can't memorize for, just testing English ability, not one of those 247 students that we took is actually grade 12 level, but they've all passed matric. 95% of them are between grade 1 and grade 8, so they're primary school level. You'll see 16 kids there are at grade 1 level, and they've got a grade 12. Maths is worse than that. I didn't want to show you maths. You would get upset. Maths is all around grade 2, 3, 4 level, and these are all people who finished school. Now, the same 247 students, now this is something that's going to surprise you, and this is, in my view, part of how we're going to crack this problem. Of those 247 students, you'll see 36% are suffering from something called post-traumatic stress disorder, full blown. 30% are suffering from elevated levels of PTSD. This is a test called the PCL inventory test. It's done by the US military. What this means is that these 36% of students, this is just normal South Africans coming from townships, rural areas, etc., are suffering the same stress as if they'd fought in Iraq or Afghanistan. They've got the same stress levels, post-traumatic stress, as if they'd fought in the US military. 40% of them suffering from chronic depression. If we look at the statistics in South Africa, how many youth on substances, dealing with mental issues, etc., etc., etc. People have got such few resources. And I just want to use an example. We learned some years ago that people who are more financially disadvantaged can't even afford a free education. Now, that sounds crazy. You can give somebody a bursary, they can go study at Wits University. But if it's a young mother from Orange Farm and she's got 2 little kids and she's got to buy school uniforms and put food on the table, she's not going to go and study at Wits and stay in some res when she's got to look after her kids. So poor people even drop out of free education. Nathaniel yesterday spoke about this research around poverty and brain development, which is real. There's a lot of research now from Cornell, Princeton, etc. This leads to this educational gap. I'll tell you an amazing irony. We've got over 9 million unemployed people, but we've got 1 million jobs, it is said, in this country that can't be filled. And you talk to employers and they say we've got a talent crisis. We can't find talent. And yet we've got 9 million people sitting around desperate for jobs. And this is this mismatch that we've got to solve. The other thing that's interesting is we all wish, and we all love technology, we all wish tech would be the magic bullet that would just solve this issue. I don't know if you guys have seen, there's so many reports of this, well-meaning companies building computer labs, putting them into schools around the country. These things gather dust, people don't learn how to use them properly. They just become white elephants. And if people do use them, tech gives you access to information, but it's doing something useful with the information that matters. And this is why MOOCs are so ineffective, these massive open online courses with this kind of student. So MIT research shows that for our kind of student, 95% of them or more will drop out of a free online course. Context's growing more difficult. We know that tech, in fact, is the very thing that's going to remove the jobs that these students could get. And this is research from McKinsey Global Institute. And if we look into the future, and I won't read that quote there, it is just mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing that in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue computer beat Garry Kasparov, the best chess player in the world. I used to play chess when I was at school. I love the game. You know that no grandmaster in the world will take on the best chess computers anymore because they are so far behind. It's scary. This is how smart technology's got. So what is going to happen to the kind of kids I'm talking about when we see this exponential growth in artificial intelligence? So I'm going to spend the rest of the talk then just talking about how do we change it? What do we need to do? What are we planning to do? This is the World Economic Forum's list of what they estimate are these skills that you need to hold down a job and be successful in 2020. What's interesting about these skills is if you look at this list, not one thing on this list is about that you can program in Java or C++ or C# or Ruby on Rails or anything else. What is it? Complex problem solving, critical thinking, working with other people, etc. If we want real education, real empowerment and transformation through education, not just credentialing, not just that you get a piece of paper, then we need a different kind of education system that can develop these things, and not just these things, empathy and grit and courage and testing the boundaries, so much more than academic. So here on a picture is what we have to do with education. We have to move away from a content-driven system. Content is abundant. The crazy thing that I showed you, I was showing you kids who've come out of 12 years of schooling. And yet in 10 seconds, I can find the whole world's information on my iPhone. And in 12 years, we can't teach these kids really anything in our school system. So we've got to move away from content to skills. Everybody needs a base set of skills, literacy, numeracy, tech skills, etc. To meta-learning, which is higher order thinking, and ultimately to mastery. And those latter two, we would say, are inside-out type of skills, not just outside in. Person has to develop them from within. So this is our solution when we think about how can we create great education at scale. So how are we going to make education work for everybody? So the first thing is, where are the schools that are working? We see great private schools, some great public schools. They've got great leadership. They've got great teachers. There's high expectations of students. That is a given, so forget that. But is that scalable? So we've got to find methodologies that are scalable to develop the whole human being, to develop that human being's brain in the same way that we think about developing a computer's brain, and the computer goes from, I remember getting a 286 and then a Pentium 1, Pentium 2, Pentium 3, Pentium 4. Now we've heard about all the growth in technology. Can we do that to the brain? Content and skills, this is where tech is really going to come in, and every human being has got genius, has got unique talents and interests. How do we develop that? So Peter Diamandis, co-founder of Singularity, says, without question, the number one driver for education is inspiration. I call it the 3 I's: inspiration, imagination, and integration. Our job is to wake up these students. They have to be inspired. You know, if somebody's inspired, I always say to the students, no army can stop somebody who's inspired and awake. If you know what you want, you just heard from Stacy now, what, at 18, 19, 20, doesn't matter what age you are, if you're inspired, you can do anything. So before we think about just the whole person learning, we've got to think about the whole species. 65 million women. Women are getting a bad deal when it comes to education. We need all girls in education, every single girl. We need her in school. We need her to get through school. And then the whole species gets better. So we focus on this. We take 70% women. When we think about a human being, what is this human being? Are we only intellects? Is it only a mind? No. When these students come into us, we've got to engender trust in them, happiness. There's so much self-hatred and depression and anger and fear. And if we just ignore that, what is going to happen? So we have to look at a person in a whole way. So what do? Our methodology, I think everybody knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So according to Maslow, you know, all a human being wants at first is they just want shelter, air, water, food, sleep, clothing, and it's interesting that he puts reproduction there as well. So, and then only much later at the top, we desire to be the most that we can be. But what we think is that that's crazy. And we turn this upside down because we think that if a human being can actually focus on their life purpose and who they are, then they're going to achieve extraordinary things. And this is what we find. You sort out that side, the inspiration and the imagination, everything else comes flying in. So I'm going to show you the results of this. Now, remember I showed you those 247 students and their level of post-traumatic stress disorder compared to the US government? Very proud of this research, which has just been published in an international journal on our students. And at a normal university where students are studying psychology, you can see that students who did have post-traumatic stress in a normal South African university, not many, but some, actually became more traumatized as university went on. And all of these students that were going through these processes of daily meditation and so on become non-symptomatic. That is quite a hard result to achieve, that within less than 6 months, you can take somebody suffering from really terrible levels of post-traumatic stress and get them to be normal. Same thing with depression. We saw 40% of students coming down, and in a traditional institution, students getting more depressed over time, and then with this kind of methodology that's more inside out, depression going away. So now I just want to talk about brain-based learning quickly. And this is going to get into the field of consciousness development, which is something that I've been so fascinated about in the last 20 years, human consciousness. How do we upgrade this nervous system, this hardware and software in the brain, and help human beings develop higher states of consciousness and brain functioning? We call it brain-based learning. So the human brain is an unbelievable thing. Human brain has 100 billion neurons in it. Every neuron can create 10,000 connections. You can have 100 trillion connections in your brain. 100 trillion connections is 1,000 times more than all the stars we've got in our whole galaxy. That's how incredible every one of our brains is. So at the beginning, when you guys said you thought every human being could be exponential, that is a beautiful answer, because that's true. We have all got the capability of having 100 trillion of these connections going on in our brain. This is an unbelievable thing that is possible. So when we think about the development of consciousness, the best way I can describe it is just like, it's like technology, but for the brain, just natural technology for the brain. So just like you could take a computer from a Pentium 1 to a Pentium 4, the RAM, the ROM, the operating speed, etc., what this is like is waking up a person who's already awake. So it's like waking up from being awake, okay? Normally we wake up from being asleep. Imagine waking up from being awake. So what do I mean by that? So just an example, imagine when you're very, very tired. Imagine if you could measure the amount of light coming out of the normal person's head. When you're exhausted, how much light is coming out of you, or how much wakefulness is there? And then you have a good night's sleep and you're much more awake, so much more bright. And then you go on a fantastic holiday and you're so much more bright. This is what I mean waking up from being awake. So what if we could do that to the nth degree, like a light bulb, really, really switch on the student inside and wake them up? So I'm going to just show you a couple of research slides, and then we'll be wrapping up pretty soon. This is research. Adam yesterday was talking about EEG, electroencephalograph, measuring coherence in the brain, alpha, beta, theta, and delta frequencies. Here's a person, before they've learned to meditate, after 4 months of experiencing transcendence, and you can see that the brain's starting to wake up. These things are called brain spindles. Now you're starting to see across this frequency along the x-axis, and after 15 years, this is the same individual. You're starting to see this brain is really getting rewired. We were talking about these 100 trillion connections. This is what's going on in the brain. Now, what is the impact of this? What we've tried to show in our university is that a traditional model of a university is flawed because it's elitist. It assumes that only some people can be exponential, and it says basically genius in and genius out. So if I'm Harvard, I'm going to take the 0.1% of the population. What am I going to push out the other end? I'm going to push out 1% of the population, who are the brightest people. And what you can see here on the screen, in fact, I mentioned the name of that university, but students who come in are actually geniuses, and this is the IQs over 4 years. What's happened? Nothing, okay? Whereas if you look at a consciousness-based approach, within 4 years, students' IQs are going to increase between 9 and 14 points. And it's not just IQ that matters. It's emotional intelligence, creativity, social learning, working relationships. All of these things matter. And this makes a difference. So this is a school, Maharishi School, taking students who are at the 50th percentile of all Americans. This is published research done every single year for 20 years. And after 5 years, these students go from just average Joe soap in America, like position 150 million out of 300 million people, to the top 1 percentile of all Americans. That is exciting. If you're an educationalist and you can do that with your students to their brains, you can change the world. So just going to quickly talk about now how do you scale all of this. And this is where technology is such a miracle. Technology cracks the scale issue. It allows us as educators to package the world's best educators, to get it out there at absolute scale. Yesterday, Anita Breeder was talking about AI-based tutors. That is for sure coming. Every student's going to have an artificial intelligence-based tutor who will allow them to go at their own speed. That is quite a miraculous thing. EdTech expenditure going up massively. And we know that these technologies are, and they're already here. They're going to be game-changing. They're getting more game-changing. I'll just use 2 examples of things that we do. We use reading software. Students like Nepo coming in are reading at only 10 to 20 words a minute, under 50 words a minute. For us to get Nepo to be able to be a vice president in a bank, he needs to read at 500 words a minute. So we use software to do that. He needs to learn math, and he's got so many holes in his math. We can achieve miraculous things with software building up his maths ability. So all of these things together, that is going to be game-changing and allow us to really, really scale great education. So what does the future look like? And sorry, I've taken a little bit too long. The future looks like what's being found now. A lot of us, when we first heard about AI, we get scared of it. We think, what's it going to do? Is it going to replace human beings? What's interesting is that they're finding that human beings who are skilled using AI do better than AI on its own or humans on their own. And that is really the future. The future in education and in every field is going to be man with technology, man plus technology, not man versus technology. This is the Global Learning XPrize, something I'm very, very excited about. Elon Musk is funding this. It's a $15 million competition. Already they've chosen the 5 finalists. And what this competition is to find, this XPrize, is can a computer or a tablet teach an illiterate kid to read and become totally literate, read and write, within just 18 months without any human intervention. And there's 5 finalists, and I think they're going to do it. And that is going to already change the world, how we teach literacy, etc. So what does this near and imagined future look like? This is what I think the future of education is going to be. And this is what we're working on, mass personalization. It's going to be about human technologies. How do we develop human beings, the human brain, all aspects of the human being, and evolving the human being faster alongside this IT revolution? How do we put the best of personalized technology with this mass-scale development of human beings? And I also want to say on that is that broken human beings, if we have broken human beings with powerful technology, that's a dangerous thing. So we need whole human beings using powerful technology. So friends, this is a future that we're working on at the moment and dreaming about. The first moonshot is, you saw 17,000 students we've got through. We're trying to, in the short term, get 100,000 Nepos off the streets and into education. We think that they'll earn R1 trillion between them. But where we're really trying to get to is, can we disrupt university education? Because it's so expensive, and as I said, it's so elitist. So Harvard costs $55,000 a year. We want to offer university education at $500 a year or less. For a whole year, including food, books, materials, everything, $2 a day. So we need to leverage tech innovation on this. And so anyone out here in this incredible audience who's interested in disrupting education across Africa, please, please be in touch. Would love to work with you on some of the tech developments and other developments so that we can do this. And the other thing we want to do is, now we have this opportunity in the South African school system, and again, anyone that wants to come and help on this, please come and help. We have an open platform now. There's never been a greater political will in this country. President Ramaphosa's behind this. The Minister of Education's behind this. Director General, work with them very, very closely. There is political will to fix our school system, and we're working on it. So if anyone wants to help on this thing, we really would love to work with you. And lastly, we have this opportunity to harness the greatest demographic dividend that we've ever had in this continent. By 2050, we are going to have 830 million youth. Either we're going to have 830 million youth, of which 1 in 6 is still employed and the rest are going to be going wild and crazy, or we're going to harness this, and could we create 830 million Larry Pages and Sergey Brins and Mahatma Gandhis and everything else? We can have a total change on our continent if we could develop these youth. So in conclusion, this is the most exciting time ever in the history of education. Been working on this, as I say, for over 20 years, and we've seen anything is possible. Miracles are possible. There's no one child in this country that should be left behind. So the answer is yes. To go back to your question in the beginning, you put your hands up, you said human beings are exponential. They are exponential. We've just got to show and prove it and do it that genius is not just in some of us, it's in all of us. So thank you. Please come and help. Appreciate your time.